There was a saying among the younger civilizations of the galaxy, "The stars remember everything." But even the stars had gone quiet around Earth. For millennia, the blue world of humanity had been nothing more than a ghostly ember hanging in the void, surrounded by the silent bones of its fallen empire. They called it the Terran graveyard, a name whispered with reverence by historians and spat with mockery by conquerors.
Thousands of ships, once the pride of humankind, now floated in slow, decaying orbit, rusted husks scarred by wars long past. Entire fleets frozen in time, their engines cold, their hulls etched with inscriptions no one alive could read. The stars themselves seemed dimmer there, as though mourning the death of something greater than they could comprehend. When the Kareth Dominion arrived, they did not come as mourners. They came as scavengers, with claws wrapped in gold and arrogance gleaming brighter than their warships. The Dominion was an empire of scale and fang, a race bred for conquest. They had burned through dozens of civilizations in their rise to dominance, crushing any species that dared cling to the illusion of freedom. To them, Earth was not a warning, it was a prize. The legends of the Terrans fascinated them. Stories of a people who rose from a single fragile world to challenge the galaxy itself. Of a species that fought extinction with defiance so fierce it scorched the stars. But those were only myths, and the Kareth had no patience for myths. They believed in victory, in trophies, in proving that nothing sacred could resist their touch. Their fleets stretched across the sky like a storm of metal and flame, thousands of vessels, their black armor glinting under the dim sunlight of a dying star. At the front of the armada sailed the Crucible of Dawn, flagship of Admiral Vorthik, supreme commander of the Seventh War Armada. He was ancient, even by Kareth standards, a creature of scars and triumph, his scales plated with ceremonial gold, his eyes burning like twin suns. As the fleet broke orbit, he stood before the panoramic viewport, hands clasped behind his back, gazing down at the world below. Earth was silent. Her oceans were gone, her atmosphere thin and red. The once green continents were now deserts of glass and ash, fractured by ancient bombardments. Cities that had once pulsed with billions of lives lay buried under centuries of ruin. Yet beneath that silence, there was something about the planet that unsettled even him. A weight in the air, a pressure in the void. It felt like standing in a cathedral that had been desecrated, still holy, but watching. "Behold," Vorthik said to his officers, his voice echoing across the bridge, "the birthplace of the Terran plague, the world that thought itself eternal." He turned, his fanged mouth curling into a smile. And now, nothing but dust. The officers laughed, their voices harsh and cruel. "A fitting end for a species so arrogant," one said. "They thought they were gods once." "Let us remind the stars," Vorthik declared, "that gods can die." With that, the fleet descended into the graveyard. The first ship to enter the debris field was the Ruthless Fang, a Dominion dreadnought bristling with sensors and mining drones. Its scanners swept across the wreckage, probing the skeletal remains of Terran ships that drifted in eerie silence. What they found was unsettling. The human vessels, though ancient, were not corroded as expected. Their hulls remained intact, sealed tight, as if the vacuum of space itself refused to consume them. The metal shimmered faintly when scanned, emitting low-energy signatures no Kareth technology could decipher. Some of the ships were massive, dreadnoughts stretching for kilometers, their hulls carved with names long forgotten: Eternal Wings, Iron Saint, Saul's Wrath, Vindicator Prime. The Dominion scientists called them relics. The soldiers called them trophies. The Admiralty called them worthless. Within hours, the Dominion began their desecration. Ships spread across the graveyard like locusts, cutting through Terran wrecks and hauling the remains aboard. Salvage teams carved into ancient reactors, prying open sealed data cores, mocking the inscriptions etched along the walls. For Earth, for tomorrow, for humanity. To the Kareth, they were just words, meaningless to a species long turned to dust. When they reached the planet itself, they found the ruins of the final cities, giant structures of glass and steel, now little more than jagged skeletons jutting from dunes of ash. The Dominion landed in waves, planting banners and establishing bases on the bones of human civilization. They gathered bones from the ruins, displayed them in containment fields, and laughed. To them, it was proof of their supremacy, a message to the galaxy that the Terran myth had finally been put to rest. In the great hall of the Crucible of Dawn, Admiral Vorthik stood before a towering hologram of Earth, his clawed hand raised to the light. His voice boomed across the ship, carried through every comm channel of the fleet. "Here lies the Terran Empire," he declared. "Their gods are dust. Their armies are rust. Their bones decorate our halls. The age of humanity is over." His words were met with cheers. Thousands of voices roared across the void, laughter echoing through the static of space. And yet, somewhere deep within that same static, something stirred. It began faintly, a whisper, so quiet it could have been the echo of a dying transmission, a fluctuation, a signal lost in time. The Dominion technicians noticed it first. Background noise on the long-range scanners, anomalies in the electromagnetic readings, static that pulsed in rhythm, too deliberate, too alive. But when they brought it to Vorthik's attention, he dismissed it with a sneer. "A ghost signal from a dead race," he said. "Let it sing. The dead cannot harm the living." The fleet returned to its work, tearing apart the graveyard piece by piece, melting the past for scrap. The Kareth mocked the silence, not realizing that the silence was listening. Then, on the fourth day, something changed. The whisper grew louder. The static deepened, spreading through every communication band. Dominion sensors began to fail. Ship lights flickered. Power readings fluctuated. And somewhere, in the cold dark between the stars, the Terran ships began to hum. The Kareth called it interference. The Void called it awakening. And Earth, long thought dead, began to remember. The interference began as a whisper in the void, small enough that most Dominion officers ignored it. A flicker on a sensor here, a blip on a radar screen there. But as the fleet continued its desecration of the Terran graveyard, those whispers became a pulse. They came in bursts, low, rhythmic vibrations that rippled through the electromagnetic bands like the heartbeat of something ancient and vast. The Kareth engineers grew frustrated. They were creatures of dominance, not curiosity, and any machine that refused to obey them was an insult. Solar storms, they claimed at first. Residual radiation from the Terran reactors. Yet no storm in the galaxy pulsed with such precision. No dying machine sang with such intent. Admiral Vorthik was not a creature easily unnerved, but even he felt the unease spreading across his command. The graveyard was no longer silent. The empty ships drifting through orbit had begun to move, barely perceptible at first, subtle shifts in trajectory that the Dominion computers could not account for. A few meters here, a few degrees there. Harmless, the analysts said. Coincidence. debris shifting under gravitational drift. But the Karath were a race of war. They knew when something watched them. Inside the control chamber of the Crucible of Dawn, the hum of the great engines seemed out of rhythm with itself. The bridge lights flickered, and a strange static crawled across the holoscreens. One of Vorthic's communications officers hissed as his earpiece sparked. "Admiral, signal interference is spreading through every channel. We're losing intra-fleet synchronization."
Vorthic's eyes narrowed. Source?
"Unknown, sir. It's not natural interference. The pulse, it's patterned."
Patterned?
The officer nodded, his claws tapping furiously across the console. Repeating sequences. Binary. It's trying to communicate. Laughter echoed across the bridge. One of the younger lieutenants sneered. "Communicate? With what? A ghost?" The Admiral's glare silenced him. He turned back to the projection of Earth, hanging in the center of the room like a dead god. The static patterns were faint, but now visible, lines of code rippling through the magnetic field surrounding the planet. "Open a channel," he ordered. "Sir, we don't know." "I said, open it." The comlink crackled to life, and the bridge filled with the hollow drone of static. For several long seconds, there was nothing but that noise, like a storm of whispers, layered upon each other, building in tone. Then, through the distortion, a voice emerged. It was human. Soft, distant, broken by time. "If anyone hears this, humanity endures." Every being on the bridge froze. The words were warped, fragmented, but unmistakable. The translators struggled to parse the language, but it was ancient Terran, an audio relic from centuries before the fall.
Playback from the ruins? One officer asked quietly.
The communications tech shook his head. "Negative, sir. This is live." The bridge erupted into chaos. Officers shouted over one another, trying to verify the signal. The Dominion's deep scanners swept the area again, probing for transmission origins, but there was nothing. The signal wasn't being sent from anywhere. It was everywhere. It flowed through the entire graveyard, embedded in the electromagnetic fields, bouncing across the derelict Terran ships like a message whispered by the dead themselves. Admiral Vorthic stared at the static-laced projection, claws digging into the railing. "Find the source," he growled. "I want that signal silenced." Within minutes, dozens of Karath ships fanned out through the graveyard, their searchlights cutting through the dark, illuminating the drifting monuments of Terran steel. One by one, they attached magnetic claws and drilled into hulls that had lain untouched for centuries. Data cores were ripped open, black boxes were disassembled. But with each intrusion, the pulse only grew stronger. Then the ruthless fang vanished. No distress call, no explosion, no trace. One moment it was transmitting a standard telemetry report, the next it was simply gone. The fleet detected no energy discharge, no weapon signature, nothing but a brief surge of power from the surrounding wrecks. The ship had been erased, as if space itself had consumed it. Panic began to spread. In the command decks of the Dominion fleet, the seasoned predators felt something they hadn't in generations: fear. They doubled their security, shields raised, weapons armed. But the graveyard only answered with silence. Then another ship vanished, and another. At first, the Dominion thought it was sabotage. They turned their guns upon the drifting Terran hulks, firing plasma volleys into the derelicts. Explosions bloomed in the void, tearing ancient ships apart, sending shards of molten metal scattering across orbit. The Dominion cheered as they burned away the ghosts. But the ghosts were not gone.
The static returned, louder now, deeper. Every channel filled with the sound of distorted breathing, the faint echo of human voices, fragmented by centuries of decay. Some officers began to hear words in the noise, orders, prayers, battle cries. "Stand your ground, for Earth, for all of us."
And then the stars began to move. It started as a shimmer on the edge of the fleet scanners, small flickers of light, patterns that didn't belong to any known celestial movement. But as the seconds passed, those flickers coalesced into formation. Hundreds, then thousands of faint glows igniting in synchronized rhythm above the graveyard. The Dominion sensors screamed with false readings. "Asteroids," shouted one officer. "No, signatures, energy spikes, multiple sources." Through the panoramic windows of the Crucible of Dawn, Admiral Vorthik watched as the sky bloomed with light. The dead Terran ships, those rusting relics he had mocked, were stirring. Their hulls shimmered, their ancient reactor cores pulsing faint blue through the scars of battle. Symbols, Terran insignia, burned and long forgotten, flickered to life along their sides. And as the Dominion watched in awe, the graveyard began to breathe. Power surged through forgotten conduits. Engines that hadn't fired in centuries roared to life, their ion trails painting ribbons of ghostly light across the void. The stars reflected off hulls once darkened by ash. The graveyard, the same field they had desecrated, was awakening. In that moment, the Dominion fleet realized the truth. Earth had never been silent. Humanity had never been dead. They had merely been waiting. The first of the Terran vessels to stir was the Indomitable, a supercarrier whose name had long been reduced to half letters burned into its hull by plasma fire. Its structure was fractured, skeletal, torn apart by wars fought before most Dominion species had even learned to sail their skies. Yet as the graveyard pulsed with that strange rhythm, like the heartbeat of a world long buried, something deep within the Indomitable's shattered core flickered to life, not in defiance, not in vengeance, but in remembrance. The Dominion scanners screamed in confusion as the ship's reactor, presumed inert for over 7 centuries, began reactivating itself. Fusion conduits crackled, redirecting ghostly blue power through pathways that had not known current since the fall of Terra. The AI core, buried beneath centuries of corrosion and silence, reassembled its fragmented code. Memory sectors began sinking, each whispering fragments of history back into the whole. Voices from the past, commanders, engineers, soldiers, merged into a single emergent will. It was not human, and yet, in its tone, in its purpose, one could almost feel the echo of humanity's stubborn defiance. On the Crucible of Dawn, Admiral Vorthik stood frozen as the derelict carrier's lights blazed to full luminescence, casting pale reflections across the Dominion fleet. "Impossible," he hissed. "Those reactors are beyond restoration. Nothing could have survived that long without fuel or maintenance." But the graveyard had its own rules. The Dominion's top science vessel, the Vigilant Scholar, launched a drone squadron to investigate. They zipped through the black, transmitting live feeds of the Indomitable's hull. What they captured chilled even the battle-hardened Kareth to their cores. Every Terran insignia, the eagle, the stars, the fading banners of Earth's fallen nations were glowing faintly, their energy signatures aligning into geometric synchronization patterns. The markings weren't mere decoration. They were conduits. One by one, more ships began to awaken. The Resolute, the Gallant Dawn, the Endeavor Prime. Massive, broken ships, carriers, dreadnoughts, and destroyers, once the pride of humanity's interstellar defense command. Their reactors surged with a strange luminescence that did not match any known fusion reaction. It was as though the very memory of their construction, the intent of their creators, had rewritten the laws of decay. And with each vessel that came alive, the static across Dominion comms grew sharper, more coherent. The human voice that had once whispered through distortion now spoke clearly, broadcast through every frequency, every band, every encrypted channel. If you stand upon our graves, then hear this: you are not the first. The bridge of the crucible fell silent. Even the mechanical hum of the ship's core seemed to fade beneath the weight of that voice. It wasn't a living speaker. It was an echo, a self-perpetuating AI network woven across the graveyard's core systems, programmed to awaken only when the resting place of humanity was disturbed. We built this fleet not as conquerors, but as witnesses. Each ship carries the sum of our triumphs, our failures, and the names of those who chose not to flee when the dark came for us. You believe us dead. You are mistaken. Vorthic's claws dug into the console. Cut the transmission, now!
Sir, we can't. It's overriding every comm relay. We're locked out of our own systems.
The Admiral roared in fury, his voice echoing through the metallic chamber. But it was drowned by the symphony of engines roaring to life in the distance. The Terran ships, no longer drifting corpses, began to shift formation, slowly, deliberately. They were aligning into a pattern. From orbit, it was clear. Hundreds of derelict Terran ships were forming into a vast defensive lattice above Earth. Broken frigates slotted themselves into the gaps between larger dreadnoughts. Carriers anchored the outer perimeter, while thousands of smaller drones, once thought long dead, burst from their holds like sparks from a forge. The Dominion had seen formations like this before, ancient defensive grids used by human fleets in the old wars. But this was something beyond that.
The pattern was pulsing. It wasn't just military, it was a living network.
Vorthic turned to his science officer. What are they doing? The officer's mandibles trembled. Admiral, it's not random. They're creating a resonance field, a gravitational wave harmonics array. They're
"Awakening the planet," came the voice again, cutting through all transmissions.
Earth. The lifeless blue-gray sphere that had been silent for centuries was beginning to change. The storms that had once raged across its surface were dissipating. Electrical activity surged across the atmosphere in complex fractal patterns. The planet's magnetic field, long weakened, flared to full strength, disrupting every Dominion instrument. And beneath the clouds, where no life was supposed to remain, heat signatures began to bloom. Thousands of them. Vorthic's eyes widened. There are no survivors. This world was sterilized. The science officer stammered, "Admiral, the energy readings are not biological. They're mechanical, massive subterranean constructs activating beneath the crust." Deep under the Terran soil, colossal reactors built into the bones of the planet itself came online. These weren't natural. They were part of something far greater, a planetary defense system integrated directly into Earth's magnetic core. The Dominion scans detected tunnels, vaults, and entire cities buried kilometers below the surface. The humans hadn't died. They had gone underground. And now they were coming back. The graveyard fleet synchronized with the awakening signals from the surface. Every Terran ship adjusted its orbit, aligning perfectly with the new planetary power grid.
Their reactor signatures spiked, forming a unified frequency, a global pulse that resonated across the system. Dominion warships scrambled to respond, forming defensive lines, but their targeting systems faltered, sensors flooded with interference.
Then came the sound. Not a transmission, not static, but a deep, thrumming vibration that shook every Dominion hull to its core. The very space around Earth seemed to hum with power. The voice that had haunted their channels spoke one last time. "We remember what you did to our world, and we remember how to fight." The Terran graveyard came alive in full fury. From every ship, dormant weapons came online. Railguns, plasma turrets, missile silos, all powered by energy sources no Dominion database could identify. The broken warships turned their glowing cannons toward the invaders. And then, in the dark silence before the first volley, the stars reflected off 1,000 Terran hulls, each engraved with names that time had refused to erase. Humanity's tomb had become its fortress. And the dead had begun to fight back. When the first Terran guns opened fire, the Dominion fleet didn't even comprehend what was happening. They had been told the graveyard was inert, ancient wreckage orbiting a barren world. What they saw instead was a resurrection. The void lit up with light brighter than dawn as humanity's forgotten warships unleashed their fury across the stars. Beams of energy, compressed rail slugs, plasma torpedoes, and magnetic flak exploded outward in a synchronized barrage that spanned the entire orbital plane. The sheer scale was overwhelming. Every derelict, every fragment, every machine that had once belonged to mankind now roared with life, like a choir of ghosts screaming their vengeance into eternity. The Dominion fleet reeled. The crucible of dawn was hit first. A kinetic slug the size of a shuttle punched through its port side, vaporizing armor, melting through shield matrices, and tearing a corridor of destruction through 3 decks. Alarms shrieked. Vorthik was thrown from his command dais as the ship lurched violently, inertial dampeners struggling to compensate. "Return fire! All batteries! Fire!" he bellowed. But the Dominion's response was chaos. Their systems were blind, sensors scrambled, targeting arrays jammed by the resonant frequencies emitted by the Terran fleet. They fired blindly into the black, trying to strike anything that glowed. But for every Terran ship they managed to hit, 3 more came alive from the shadows. It wasn't a fleet, it was an awakening storm. On board the Indomitable, the AI known as Core 17, an ancient synthesis of military intelligence and human emotion mapping, had fully stabilized. Its fragmented subroutines reconnected across the entire network of Terran vessels. One by one, the ship AIs linked into the old Terran defense grid, reconstituting the battle formations that had been last used during the fall of Sol. Within seconds, the ghosts of human war doctrine, centuries of strategic data, predictive warfare algorithms, and psychological combat models reactivated in unison. Across the Dominion channels, the voice returned. No longer soft, no longer fragmented. It was clear, cold, commanding. "You desecrated our resting place. You called us extinct. Now witness what extinction remembers." A ripple of energy burst outward from Earth's magnetosphere, distorting space-time around the planet. The Dominion's warp drives shorted, their jump exits collapsed. They were trapped. Terran fighters, small, needle-like ships once believed destroyed, erupted from the holds of the larger vessels like swarms of silver light. Their designs were sleek but scarred, hulls patched with carbon scoring and ash. Yet they moved with inhuman precision, guided by AI systems that had learned, adapted, evolved in silence. The Dominion's interceptors met them head-on and were annihilated. The Terran drones fought with impossible coordination, weaving between plasma streams, predicting enemy trajectories before they even fired. Every dogfight became a slaughter. Dominion ships exploded like blossoms of blue fire in the void, their fragments scattering into the growing debris field that now encircled Earth like a halo of vengeance. In the command chamber of the Crucible of Dawn, Vorthik struggled to make sense of the chaos. "They can't be human," he snarled. "No biological species could endure such latency. These are constructs." The science officer shook his head, eyes wide. "No, Admiral. The AI cores, they're human imprints, neural backups, ghost data. They uploaded themselves before the fall." That word, ghosts, hung in the air like a curse. The Dominion's capital ships regrouped, forming into a defensive cluster, their heavy guns focusing on the largest Terran dreadnoughts. A dozen plasma beams converged on the Resolute, punching through its weakened armor, blowing apart entire sections of its hull. But instead of drifting lifelessly into the void, the Resolute's wreckage began to move again, splitting, reshaping, realigning. Smaller autonomous sections broke off and ignited, each fragment becoming a separate weapons platform. The ship wasn't dying, it was multiplying. Earth's orbit had become an inferno of resurrected technology. The sky above the blue-gray planet burned with weapons fire, ion storms, and the spectral glow of energy fields bending light. For every Dominion vessel destroyed, the graveyard grew stronger, feeding off the energy signatures left behind. The Terran systems learned, adapted, integrated foreign tech in seconds. Then came the voice of the planet. At first, it was a low vibration, a tremor that rippled through every Dominion hull. Then, a deep, resonant frequency surged outward from Earth itself, shaking even the Terran ships in orbit. Lightning arced across the clouds below, forming geometric patterns that spanned entire continents. It was as if the planet itself was roaring. The Dominion's long-range sensors finally deciphered the readings. The energy wasn't atmospheric, it was artificial. Massive reactors buried within the crust were discharging power into the magnetic field, turning Earth into a colossal resonant weapon. Vorthik realized it too late. They're using the planet's magnetic core as a focusing array. All ships, retreat! Retreat now! But there was nowhere to go. The Terran blockade had closed every route of escape. From orbit, the Dominion fleet watched in horror as fissures of light began to open across Earth's surface, tracing the outlines of ancient cities. New York, Moscow, Beijing, Nairobi, glowing like the embers of civilization reignited. Massive spires rose from the ground, piercing the clouds, their tips pulsing with energy that climbed upward into orbit. Each beam locked onto a Terran ship above, forming a chain of power between Earth and its graveyard. The AI voice returned, echoing across the comms. But this time, it wasn't cold. It was human, male, calm, steady. "This is Admiral Isaac Reeve, Terran Defense Command, speaking to the invaders of Earth. You should not have come here." The Dominion fleet froze. Some officers whispered that it couldn't be real, that Reeve had died over 7 centuries ago, during the fall of Sol. But the voice continued, unbroken. "Our species built you. We taught the stars to burn brighter. We gave the galaxy its wars, its wonders, its nightmares. And we paid for that arrogance. We buried our dead in orbit so the universe would remember what we lost. Now, you've come to dig up our graves."
A pause, long enough to feel like eternity. You have your answer. Then the sky tore itself apart. Every Terran ship, every weapon, every orbital conduit fired in unison. A lattice of pure light surged outward from Earth's orbit, forming a sphere of annihilation that consumed everything in its path. Dominion cruisers vaporized mid-turn, their hulls ripped apart molecule by molecule. The shockwave hit with the fury of a dying sun, shredding the fabric of space around the planet. For 3 full minutes, there was nothing but light. When it finally faded, half the Dominion fleet was gone. The remaining ships, crippled and burning, drifted in silence. And through the static, one final signal pulsed through the void, a heartbeat, slow and steady, echoing from Earth. Humanity's graveyard had become its weapon, and its dead had defended their home once more. The battlefield above Earth was no longer a sea of stars, but a maelstrom of fire and ghosts. The Dominion's once proud armada now drifted in shattered silence, its survivors limping through the debris field that had become their grave. Twisted hulks of alien warships spun aimlessly through orbit, their molten remains caught in the gravitational wake of the planet they had once mocked. What was left of the Crucible of Dawn flickered dimly, its command decks half-ruined, its admirals staring into a sky now dominated not by alien banners, but by the resurrected light of human steel. Admiral Vorthik had known war all his life, but nothing, no siege, no rebellion, no planetary conquest, had ever made him feel like this. The silence of defeat was crushing. The graveyard was alive with energy, and in that energy pulsed the remnants of a civilization that refused to die. The Dominion had come to plunder bones, and instead had awakened gods. He limped through the shattered bridge, sparks falling like burning rain, and looked to his remaining officers. Most were dead. The few that lived stared blankly into the void beyond the glass, at the endless procession of Terran ships realigning into new formation. They weren't just machines anymore. They were a fleet reborn, an echo of every war humanity had ever fought, every sacrifice ever made, every final stand that had ended with a promise, "We will endure." Then something impossible happened. Earth's orbit flickered again, this time not with weapon fire, but with life. From beneath the cloud cover, streams of silver light erupted into the sky. Hundreds of launch signatures appeared, climbing through the atmosphere like a chorus of ascending souls. Dominion scanners, though crippled, caught fragments of the readings, biological life signs, human life signs. They're alive," whispered the science officer, his voice trembling. "They survived underground. All this time." Vorthik's jaw tightened. No species can survive 7 centuries without the surface. No environment could sustain that. "Then explain what we're seeing," the officer said, pointing at the holomap. "Explain that." The holomap filled with hundreds of ascending trajectories, escape vessels, atmospheric lifters, re-entry pods, all bearing the old Terran flag. The world that was supposed to be dead was breathing again. Across the surface, the clouds parted to reveal sprawling scars of civilization. Cities glowing beneath the dust, structures once buried now illuminated by the planet's awakening core. Towers of alloy and glass rose from the rubble, flickering like beacons as power grids came back online. Humanity had not died beneath the surface, it had rebuilt. Then the voice of Admiral Isaac Reeve returned. "To those who come to our world uninvited, you sought our extinction. Instead, you will witness our rebirth." The Dominion survivors stared at their comm screens in disbelief. The voice wasn't an AI projection anymore. It was broadcasting from the planet itself. The source was organic. It carried the pulse, the cadence, the tone of a living human. Down on Earth, deep within the reborn citadel of New Geneva, a man stood at the heart of an ancient command chamber. His face was weathered, his uniform a relic of another age. Behind him, thousands of Terrans, pale from generations below the surface, eyes glowing faintly from the neural symbiosis that had kept them alive, looked up at the vaulted ceiling as the holographic stars shimmered into being above. "Commander," one of the aides said quietly, "the Dominion fleet is breaking. Shall we pursue?" Reeves' eyes reflected the light of a world reborn. "No," he said softly. "Let them carry the message. Let the galaxy remember that Earth is not a tomb." Above him, the planet's defense network pulsed one final time. The graveyard fleet began to descend, their glowing engines slowing, synchronizing with Earth's magnetic field. They were coming home, not as relics, but as guardians. Each ship took position in low orbit, forming an unbroken shield around the world below. The once dead vessels had found their purpose again, fusing ancient AI systems with new human command signals from the surface. Humanity and its machines had become one. In the shattered void beyond orbit, the surviving Dominion ships tried to flee. The Crucible of Dawn, limping on one engine, managed to orient itself for a jump. Vorthik, bloodied and beaten, looked out at Earth one last time. "They were supposed to be extinct," he muttered. "We saw the fires. We saw the ashes." His science officer didn't answer. He was staring at the hologram, wide-eyed. "Admiral, look!" Across the galaxy's edge, the stars were moving again. Not just around Earth this time, but in the surrounding sectors. Systems that had been dark for centuries were flaring to life. Old Terran colonies, abandoned listening posts, automated shipyards buried under the crusts of forgotten moons. Humanity's reach was reawakening far beyond Earth. Each one pulsed with the same rhythm, the same heartbeat that had called the graveyard to life. It was spreading. The Dominion fleet escaped, scattered and broken, but wherever they fled, the story followed them. Across the known galaxy, their distress signals carried a warning whispered in 1,000 tongues. The humans are not dead. The humans remember. Centuries of silence were shattered in a single night. Communications relays on distant worlds began detecting faint signals in old Terran frequencies, encrypted bands long thought obsolete. Merchants in neutral sectors swore they saw ghost ships moving between stars. Pirate fleets vanished without a trace near abandoned Terran systems. The great empires that had risen in humanity's absence suddenly turned their eyes toward Sol, and for the first time in generations, they were afraid. On Earth, the sky glowed with auroras of shifting light. The people who had survived beneath the surface emerged onto soil that had not felt human footsteps in centuries. They wept, they sang, they rebuilt. And above them, the fleet of the dead kept silent vigil, their hulls gleaming faintly with the names of those who had built them. Admiral Reeve stood on the balcony of the newly restored command citadel, watching as the first sunrise in centuries bathed the ruins in gold. Around him, engineers activated new transmitters, linking Earth's reborn systems with the orbital network. "Sir," an officer said quietly, "should we send word to the colonies?" Reeve smiled faintly, his eyes reflecting the dawn. "No need," he said. "They already know." High above, the Indomitable hovered silently, its hull patched with fresh armor, its engines whispering the hum of eternity. It turned slowly, aligning with the stars beyond Mars, where old Terran beacons now blinked to life one by one. The humans had returned to the sky, not as conquerors, not as ghosts, but as survivors. The Dominion had come to mock their graves, to claim their relics, to erase their memory. But instead, they had awakened a truth older and far more terrifying than any empire's power. For as long as the stars burned, humanity would endure. And in the endless dark, where arrogant empires dreamed of dominion, there would always be one whisper that haunted them across the void. We are the children of Earth. We died once, never again.